Steve and Rhyll Croshaw have personal experience in the addiction and recovery process. They have been very willing to be open and to sharing personal information, personal experiences, and to give you and to display personal evidence that you can be happy and have successful recoveries and have a wonderful life in dealing with this as a family. Today they're being joined by their daughter Tara, and she is going to talk a little bit about the perspective of a child in a family that has been dealing or is dealing with this addiction. I am going to not read exactly what's in the program because I know you all can read, and instead I'm just going to turn the time over to them. And we thank you for being here.
It is our pleasure to be here, and thank you for coming today. This is a great event. As Rhyll and I have worked with this subject for decades, part of it silently and now part of it publicly, we recognize the incredible importance of education and information, and we would like to thank the people from UCAP, Utah Coalition Against Pornography, and their diligent efforts to bring this conference about. It's been powerful, and it's been a great opportunity for all of us to be here. Rhyll and I will share much of our own story, and we've invited our daughter Tara to share along with us her story. This is a family issue that we talk about today, and we believe that no family will be left untouched. Every family will experience something related with pornography addiction and to some degree trauma. Every family and every community in this entire country and throughout the world in some way. Doesn't mean it will be a direct impact. It may be a direct impact, but we all know someone in our lives whose life has been dramatically challenged as a result of the use of pornography and the related addiction and the trauma that's associated with it of people who are affected even though they're not involved. So we're grateful to be here. I'd like to have Rhyll just say a little bit about our foundation and who we are as a foundation and what we do and why we are somewhat public with what our story is.
We've been married 42 years, and 32 of it was up and down, I have to say 42 years of recovery and but mostly the chaos. And so about 6 years ago, we determined that we had suffered and struggled and made probably about every mistake that can be made. We call ourselves the poster children of mistakes. And as we discovered and realized that, we felt when we found some recovery, and we have not, you don't get to the finish line, believe it or not. There's no finish line on recovery. And as we found that, we knew that we needed to help others. There were hundreds of thousands who were struggling like we had been and were. So we started Lifeline Foundation. The SA stands for sexual addiction. Our purpose is providing individuals, couples, and families hope for recovery from sexual addiction and betrayal trauma through education, supporting 12-step recovery groups, encouraging spiritual guidance, and emphasizing qualified therapy. We believe it takes all of that to recover.
So we asked the question, will pornography and sexual addiction create stress and discord in the marriage?
Oh, if you were nodding.
See, most presentations should start off with a little humor, so that's our joke. Thank you for getting our joke. That's great. We oftentimes tell our story just between us. We'll stand up here and tell it. When we do that, we take too much time. So we're going to tell our story with a little video. It's 9 minutes. and it's abbreviated, and there's lots of stuff in between, but it's our story in a very compact form. I'm going to explain just a little bit, and so what you're going to see here as an individual, it's represented in myself, that's dealing with pornography and sexual addiction, and a spouse who's dealing with betrayal trauma, and multiple attempts to find recovery. I first came forward when I was 36 years old, and really thought that I was going to be honest and get this thing under control and never go back to it. That wasn't the case. 10 years later I went back after I had stopped, and then about 8 years later I went back. And so this is going to be told in that regard. And what we learned along the way is what we're going to talk about and the impact on the family. So let's see if we're going to have you indulge us for this moment, if I can get this figured out. My first experience with pornography was at age 6. Discovered masturbation after being introduced to it by a friend, and then pornography and masturbation was part of my routine as a child. In high school, I had inappropriate relationships with some girls, so my behavior was escalating. I had no idea that I was dealing with an addiction. I didn't recognize that it was part of a routine of changing the way that I feel. I met my wife, I met her at church. She was beautiful and talented, and all that I thought I would desire to have in a wife. And so I pursued our relationship, and I pursued it vigorously.
And it looked like he was everything that he was saying that he was. And a lot of the things that he wasn't saying that he was. It looked like it was all good.
I honestly felt like marriage would solve my interest in acting out with pornography or masturbation or any other illicit sexual behavior. Marriage does not solve a problem of having a desire to act out sexually. In fact, marriage emphasizes that challenge. Shortly after we were married, not long after that, I discovered that I was interested in pornography, and that I went back to it. The escalating behavior moved from pornography to masturbation to adult establishments, and finally to acting out with prostitutes. This is a sensitive part of my story, which I feel a lot of shame about, but I felt like I had picked up a venereal disease, and I had convinced myself that I had. And that's what brought me forward. I really felt like I wanted to change and not live the double life and be an honest man. I started from the very beginning, and I went from the beginning to the end of my story at that point.
I felt so naive to the world. I had no idea about addiction. I had none back then. I didn't understand this at all. I could not put who I thought I knew together with this person that he was talking about. And I have been taught my entire life that we must forgive. And I really felt that the right thing was forgive and be a support to him, because he's broken. He's feeling so terrible. And so there wasn't a feeling of I need to take care of myself through this at all. It was I need to take care of him. And we moved on.
I was free from acting out. I was actively working to change. I was looking for a spiritual connection. I was looking for a connection with my wife and my children.
And there was this feeling of, I think he's really got this.
But as time continued on, over a period of about 3 years, that commitment waned. It started right where it had the very first time in, with pornography. Progressed from pornography to masturbation quickly. It took some time, but then I was back into prostitution. So I chose to come forward again, and I did it in a very similar way. I said to Rhyll, I need to talk to you.
I was dumbfounded. I couldn't believe it. I'd sacrificed everything, and there was no change. And I thought for the first time, maybe this isn't going to work. But that thought did not stay very long, because in my pioneer woman strength, I decided that I needed to help him.
Rhyll was really leading the recovery effort.
I started finding books. I read a book, and I made the phone calls. I was determined to help take care of this.
I didn't understand what I was up against. I didn't accept that I was dealing with an addiction. I didn't treat it like an addiction. So I was back into acting on lust by looking at pornography and then eventually all the way back to prostitution. History was repeating itself and I was back in dangerous situations. August 25th of 2005, I wanted to go someplace where I could get a lust hit, and there was a woman who wanted a ride back to her motel, she told me, and I knew that she was a prostitute. I suddenly see flashing lights behind me, and I was pulled over and arrested. And it was the first time that I really recognized how out of control my life was in relationship to the dangers and the illegal activity that I participated in. And I don't recall anything except fear and shame, and how could I possibly have been so stupid? The next part of this story is really the important part of my recovery, the beginning of my recovery. I did not sleep during the night. I laid in bed, totally awake, didn't move, and contemplated my circumstances. I have no idea how to escape this. The first question I think I asked was, do I believe in God? And as I contemplate that, I could only answer, yes, I do. And then I would ask myself the question, does he know me? And as I considered that, I would say, he knows me. Will I meet him? Yes, I will meet him. And I knew that we would talk about my experiences here on this earth. I came to the conclusion that I had no choice but to come forward again. The experience of talking to Rhyll the third time was very different, and there wasn't a lot of explanation required. And I said, I will do whatever it takes, and I will carry the responsibility of doing whatever it takes. And whatever you can do or whatever you feel like is right for you to do in your life, then obviously you need to do it. And I didn't know. I didn't know at the time whether our relationship could possibly survive.
My thoughts that day were, this is over. We've worked really hard for 32 years, but this is not working. I went directly to the only source I knew where there was peace. It wasn't me and him trying to make this work and me trying to fix him. It was me and God. But in that moment, I thought, it's over, but it's going to be okay that it's over because I've given it my best.
My motivation the third time that I came forward was based more upon my belief system. And there was less fear involved from the standpoint of losing the relationship than there was fear of losing my soul. I want to do this. I want to make a change. I recognize that I was the person in charge of my recovery. It wasn't my wife's responsibility. It wasn't my therapist's responsibility. It wasn't anyone else's responsibility to direct me. I needed to literally do the work. I also recognized that I needed to be involved with others in recovery, and I had pushed 12-step away from my life before, but this time I said, I'm ready.
His willingness to do all of this gave me tiny bits of hope. Because before, it was me setting up the appointments, reminding us. He did all of it. He set up the appointment. He asked if I would go. He didn't tell me I had to. I opened up the door of hope a little bit and a tiny bit of trust with each opportunity for him to show his willingness to do whatever it was going to take. There is great hope. I have found it in my own life, and I've seen it in hundreds of other women and couples.
That hope is centered in our relationship, my relationship with God, and a belief that He will help me. That belief, however, has to translate into some kind of action. I have to have some faith, I have to believe, and then I have to be willing to do something and not just hope that other people will do it for me. What am I willing to do? I'm willing to be honest. And then I'll I'll move forward one step at a time. Thank you.
Can you believe we're still standing here?
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's kind of interesting that I would be emotional after watching the story. I've heard it before, but I appreciate the fact that you're willing to come and listen to that story. So, my first experience with pornography was just a little boy. You heard it was age 6. And mostly experiences come to little boys. I heard about a little boy experience from a guy that's in his early 20s right now, and he said his first experience was magical, even mystical. And then when a child hears from their parents, don't do this, it's really bad, it'll hurt you, that doesn't equate to that first experience of magical, mystical, does it? So there's this, my word, I experienced something and I don't know how to explain it, but my parents tell me it's bad. So we'll talk a bit about that. Pornography is neither harmless nor helpful. Pornography use is not simply a habit. It's mood altering, belief changing, relationship damaging, addiction forming, socially harmful, spiritually deadening, life crippling practice through which one practices the ways of the adversary. That's a powerful quote by Jill Manning, who has spoken today. And so if we say, is pornography a challenge? If we believe that description, which we do, of course it is. It's the plague of our day. If you look at this diagram, and you all have been handed out this, and it kind of looks like, wow, what is that? You know, a whole bunch of stuff on there. This is what a person's life looks like that is involved in sexual addiction and pornography addiction. And the effects of what that has on a person emotionally, physically, spiritually, socially. So what you see in the center, in that mauve kind of purple area in the center, with self there, that is an individual. We are complex beings, not just physical, obviously, but we have a spiritual, mental, physical aspect. The person that's involved with sexual addiction becomes very self-absorbed. And in that very selfish position. So if you were to look at me, and Tara will talk a little bit about her dad, I was not available to my children when they wanted to talk to their dad. I wasn't mean to them, I wasn't angry with them, but I wasn't there for them. Now in my role as a father, what is my first and most important responsibility? To protect and provide for my children. A person whose life looks like this, that is a struggle. Not because I don't want to do it, but because I am not able to get out of sight of that self-absorbed, self-protection, lying and deceitful position. Now we might want to minimize and say, well, I know people that are involved in this behavior and I don't see that. The person who sees that most dramatically, who might it be? Our spouse. She's the one that sees that most dramatically. The children, not understanding very much, what they see is, where's my dad? I just have to put this in there. This is another joke. No, this is not a joke. I grew up on a farm. So you can look at that model that we were looking at before and how complicated it is. This is the description. It was simple description. A tractor, a very powerful tool, can do great things. But when it looks like this, stuck in the mud, it cannot do what it's designed to do. Now, interestingly, does anybody think that tractor can get out of that by itself? Never. That tractor will never get unstuck by itself.
So when Jill Manning talks about this being relationship damaging, this is what I can look like when I am in fear and maybe even denial or minimization or lots of different behaviors that will I call it the crazy committee. It's like, wait, everything's great. No, everything's bad. No, maybe I need to love him more because something's disconnected here. And so I was thinking at 5 a.m. this morning about an experience I hope I can get through. When the first disclosure came, we have 7 children, and one of our little boys turned 8 about that time. He wanted to be baptized, but his dad couldn't baptize him. But we hadn't talked about it. We hadn't talked about what was going on, really. Dad was having some trouble. That's all we said. Our children were 13 and younger, 5 of them. And when I told our son that he would need to wait, if he wanted to wait for Dad, he started to sob and sob and sob and sob. And I went to the basement bathroom with him and sat with him. And all I could think after the first 10 minutes was, make him stop. Because I had tried to push my pain as deep and far down as I possibly could. And to see my child suffering so much because he didn't understand. I couldn't be there for my little boy because I couldn't be honest with him. I couldn't say, this is what's going on, and we're working on this, and to give him the kind of comfort that he went from sobbing to raging. And I wanted so badly to just say, stop, don't do this. Now, if I had known, I would have done that differently. We would have done that differently. And I have, with my adult son, made amends. I have talked to him and said, I was not there for you as a mom for several years. I was not there emotionally because I was in so much trauma. And you can see this trauma response of a mom who, on the outside, we looked like we had it pulled together. I mean, really, our family looks like it's kind of pulled together occasionally. But it really did look like we had it together. But there were times, and there was chaos that was really underlying. It was not on the outside, and we were not fighters. No, we lived pretty parallel, peaceful lives.
So who's in the middle?
Back there.
Who's in the middle of this individual's?
Yeah.
So the spouse puts her husband in the middle. And the guy that's dealing with the addiction has himself in the middle. He's a really important person, isn't he? That was the next joke. So,
Let's keep going.
So, what would happen to the marriage when you have an individual that's dealing with chaotic situation of addiction, a spouse that's dealing with trauma? Is the marriage going to be healthy? Of course not. So it goes without saying. And really what happens here is there is this transfer back and forth. People try to live a parallel life. They'll try and do that so that they can stay out of each other's way. We tried that. It'll go into distress, might have a major blow, and that kind of that release valve will just go right off. Maybe some of you have witnessed or are aware of some of how that works. But you know what happens in the marriage? Is we deal with life in a very unhealthy way called drama. So in drama, we cannot communicate in healthy ways. Somebody becomes the persecutor. Somebody becomes the victim. Even somebody can become the rescuer. And in recovery, that's why we believe that therapy is so vital. Begin to learn what this stuff is, and so you can do something about it. As we go along, we're going to talk a little bit more about this, maybe even a couple of our own personal experiences. But this kind of a marriage is not going to be very good for teaching children healthy sexuality. And that's really what we're here to talk about, is teaching children healthy sexuality. And for a father who's dealing with an addiction and hiding it, for a mother who's in trauma, how in the world are they going to be able to represent healthy sexuality, marriage-centered chastity, and God's epic story? They can't. Okay, well, we already talked about that slide, didn't we? Is recovery possible? This is a very important picture to us. You see it on a whole bunch of our stuff, SA Lifeline stuff. It's on the front of Rhyll's book. This is a painting by Linda Curley Christensen called Gently Up the Stream. When I came forward the third time and made the decision that I was going to do whatever it took, no matter what, I would do whatever it took. My son, we went to each of our children separately. We had, at the time, 5 married, 2 younger boys that were not even in high school yet. And we told them exactly what was going on. The very day that I came forward, September 11th of 2005. So the reaction from our children was very different. Our daughters had a lot of tears, a lot of emotional tears. My sons were red-faced angry. Absolutely, and of course they would be. So they dealt with it differently. But we as a family, we talked about it. Rhyll was there. I had asked her to come with me. She came with me as I talked to each of our children. Our sons, red-faced angry, but 3 days later, my son Spencer came to me and he brought to us a copy of this painting by Linda Curley Christensen. And he said, I think that this could mean something to you, Dad and Mom. He had been given this picture by Linda Curley Christensen at his wedding reception. And he brought it to us. He said, can you see yourselves in that picture?
I was going to introduce Tara.
Oh,
Very quickly. Tara is an overachiever in such a positive way. She has been amazing and number 5 child. So she has a degree from Utah State in marriage and family. She has worked in family counseling areas. Currently, as a mom of 3 little boys and expecting a girl. Yes. And that will be number 18 of our grandchildren. I could go on about Tara, but and her husband Luke, who is an amazing guy as well.
Okay. Well, and what she didn't mention is I am 3 weeks out from giving birth. So if I look like I'm about to give birth, it's because I am. And you might be thinking, wow, this girl's committed. But you are a stay-at-home mom of a bunch of little ones when speaking at a porn conference is a nice break. So I really am happy to be here. Free food, nobody tugging at my sleeve. But I also have to say that I'm very proud of my parents. Watching that video, I both felt like shouting hallelujah and maybe crying a little bit. They are warriors. And I have seen from the beginning of this process what recovery takes. And it's not easy. And the banner that they are carrying gets heavy sometimes. But they carry on, and as a result, they are blessing. I suspect thousands, might be going into the millions here in the next few years. But I love you, Mom and Dad. And today, I want to take some of the fear out of this subject for some of you, because I know that this probably elicits a lot of fear for you, whether you're struggling in your marriage or you have a child who is struggling. But Marie Curie said this. She said, nothing in life is to be feared. It is only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more so that we may fear less. And I want to say that I know that this is true from my own experience, that as I have come to learn more about pornography and sexual addiction and other subjects that may be difficult, homosexuality, etc., that the more I learn, the less fearful I become. We don't need to be afraid when we are prepared, as Ed Smart said earlier today. And my hope is to give you some tools And I want you to leave here with hope for yourselves and for your families. Gotta find my arrow key here. Okay. So when you look at this picture, what do you see? On all accounts, people looking from the outside in would have seen a healthy, happy, relatively successful family. And I don't want to be overly dramatic. There was genuine happiness in our family much of the time. But kind of brewing beneath the surface was this secret. This picture was taken close to my father's second disclosure in 1996. And at this time, all of us kids knew something of my dad's problem, with exception to the youngest two twins, who were 6 at the time. But as my parents had already mentioned, in that disclosure, very little was said. My dad actually, I don't believe, spoke in that disclosure. It was just my mom gathering us, and we were only told because there were consequences happening at church. So there was always this undercurrent of discomfort in our family. My dad was never mean. He wasn't abusive, but he wasn't there. And we didn't talk about why he wasn't there. So while the silence remained, it was just quietly eating away at all of us, and it was producing disconnection and anxiety and shame in our family. So in an attempt to lighten the mood for just a second, do we have any Star Wars fans? Awesome. I like Star Wars. You may know then that Star Wars Day, which is an unofficial, however, observed holiday by some, is coming up on May 4th, as in May the 4th be with you. You'll never forget that, right? Anyway, apart from being a great, fun series, my boys love it, I think it has a lot of really good life lessons to be learned from it. Most families have secrets. And in the case of Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader, there was an enormous secret in that family. And I've been told that a family is only as sick as their secrets. And as a result of this family secret, it was creating a total disconnect. There was a lot of shame, a lot of family fights. Luke didn't really know who his father was. He didn't know his history. And the big question is, should Darth Vader, should that information should it have come out? Because we know how that disclosure went down, right? Luke lost an appendage in the process. And telling the secret was, I'm sure, painful, but bringing that out into the light, that paved the way for there to be a relationship and connection and healing. So in the end, it was because of Vader's willingness to be honest and opening his heart to his son that it ultimately saved Vader from the dark side. That's powerful. So, should we tell the kids? I know that I've had people approach me, knowing that I am the daughter of a recovering addict, saying how concerned they are about telling their kids, whether the kids are in the home or their kids are grown. But before I answer that question, keeping a secret is basically like sitting on a time bomb. It's not a matter of if, but when it's going to go off, especially if it's an active addiction. Claudia Black, who is an expert in the field of addiction, said that as much as parents wish to protect children from their own mistakes or hurtful behaviors, keeping secrets does not provide the sought-after protection. Parents do not want to cause their children pain, but that possibility was lost in the act of the addiction. And beyond that, in a study that was done, it suggested that over 65% of children in the home, or, well, I think just children in general of addicts, knew about the addiction before disclosure. So that's something to keep in mind if you're thinking or considering whether or not to share with your children. But Jeff Stewart, who is a well-known professional in the field, said this: the impact of addiction on a family is something that's difficult to keep secret. The details surrounding the nature of the addiction may never surface, but the collateral damage of strained relationships, lack of connection, and other consequences are difficult to hide from children living in the home. They know something is different, even though they might not know why. Now, I can wholeheartedly relate to that. We didn't know. As I got older, I could tell that I knew it was pornography related, but I didn't know about the extent of the addiction. So disclosure may be very painful for parent and child, but it's a very necessary part of the healing process for both parties, for the whole family. And as an adult child of an addict said, truth, even in small pieces, can lighten the load. Shame is a burden that we as children should not have to bear. So the general consensus of professionals is yes, that children should be told. And again, it doesn't matter whether or not these children are still in home or whether they are grown and gone, because they will have felt the effects of the addiction regardless. And they're still carrying those wounds around as adult children. But there are some things that you need to consider before you jump into that conversation. So first, what is your motivation in sharing? Well, first of all, bad reasons. If the afflicted spouse wants to get back at the addicted spouse, that's not a good reason to disclose. If the addict is wanting just to free themselves from some guilt, that's, again, a poor reason to disclose. It's the parent's responsibility to make sure that the needs of the children are forefront in their minds. Second is to consider the age, emotional, and physical health, maturity level of each child. Professionals suggest that it's mid-adolescence that's the earliest time, if ideally, to share that kind of information. But oftentimes disclosures are forced because the bomb has gone off. The law is having to get involved, or the parent has lost a job. So that disclosure comes at an earlier age. And lastly, decision needs to be made on a case-by-case basis. So every child is different. In a family of 7 kids, a lot of different personalities there. And of course, you're going to have different ages that you're dealing with. So thinking through all of those things is very important before you delve into that. So yes, we believe it's important to tell the kids, but why? What are the compelling reasons to do that? So first of all, validation. So that statistic, again, 65% already know based on this study. So it takes some of that crazy making out of it for the kids. As kids, again, we knew something was wrong, but we just didn't know what. And so if the secret can be told, it takes some of the anxiety and the shame out of it. Next is exposure. Kids might find out. They might have a family member or someone tell them, and if you can have a healthy disclosure, it can counteract maybe a thoughtless or even a mean-spirited act. Second or third is safety. So if the parent has engaged in sexual behavior with a child, and there are children living in the home, it's important that these children be given some information so that they can protect themselves. And children also need to know that if something has occurred, that it's not their fault. And finally, and I feel like this is perhaps the most important, is breaking that generational cycle. Addiction thrives in secrecy and shame. And secrecy and shame in parents begets secrecy and shame in children. So to be able to discuss addiction openly, for the kids to have an example of what recovery looks like, and just to have that open environment will create a context where that's not going to hopefully continue in the next generation. And another thought to consider is that children are very egocentric. They all think that the world revolves around them. So if something feels off at home, they're going to inevitably think, oh, this is my fault. I must be doing something wrong. And this was especially true for one of my sisters, who just a lot of the time just felt like our dad just didn't like her. But her inability to connect with him had so much to do with his addiction because he was so self-absorbed. My self-confidence wasn't so tied to that relationship as it was for my sister. But looking back, we're all kind of fish in fish bowls. So as I look back at that experience, I realized that for years I really didn't know my father. He wouldn't allow us to go to a place of emotional depth with him. And I remember when he would share about his past, his childhood memories or whatever, I would just revel in it. And again, when I look back, I recognize that he wasn't very forthcoming about his history because there was so much shame attached to his past. And additionally, he rarely, if ever, asked me about things of a personal nature in my life. And so that there was a total emotional disconnect. I went to my mom for emotional support. But it's important to understand that addiction just hinders a person from being able to fully love and to be loved. So that, again, that healthy disclosure gives a child an opportunity to recognize that the disconnect, the tension, it's not their fault. And that will be very helpful for them in their healing. So this family picture was taken just a few months prior to my father's third disclosure, which you could probably term his first, because in reality, the first two times we really weren't told enough information to term it a disclosure. And in fact, I think it caused more confusion and more problems than it did help. But at the time of this third disclosure, everyone was out of the house, with exception to, again, the two youngest, who were 15. And I remember this day really well. My husband and I had come over for Sunday dinner, and, just any other Sunday. And quickly after getting there, my dad just pulled us outside, sat us down, and he began to tell us what had gone on. I think it was just 2 weeks previous. So he told me and my husband that he had been excommunicated from our church and that he had been arrested, and went into some detail about that. And it's hard to describe the depth of the emotion that I felt when I heard that. I felt incredible sadness and anger, and I think most of all, just this deep sense of betrayal. It was really hard for me to reconcile this man that I loved and put him in the shoes of this other man he was describing involved in this lewd behavior. But at the same time, it was kind of unusual because there was some relief, because all of those years, here I was 23 and grown, but all of those years there was just this big question of what is going on? And to hear the truth from the man's lips, who had never said the word probably pornography ever when I was around, it was just like, finally, I'm hearing it from your mouth. And so while the anger and the sadness was so real, there was relief, even that very day, even in all of the crazy and the chaos. And I believe it was that day that we all began to heal. My parents did a lot right that day. They sat together, and my mom sat calmly next to my dad. She wasn't overly emotional. I'm sure she was just so raw from the whole experience. But I'm grateful that she wasn't super dramatic. I think had she been sobbing and just all up in arms, it would have been really difficult for me to see past her pain and to be able to hear my dad out. Next, my dad was accountable. He was honest. He was evidently remorseful for his behavior. And he was willing to field questions. I didn't want to ask too many questions. I didn't want too much detail, but he was willing to take those questions. And he talked about his determination to recover. So for you, if the question right now is, do we share this with our children? these are some ideas of what a healthy disclosure will look like. So both parents are present and participatory. That's important. Both parents are in agreement to disclose to the children. There's one caveat to this. This can be tricky if there's a case of separation or divorce and the parent who's the primary guardian feels like in order to protect the child, particularly if the addict is involved with sexual behavior with minors, that you may choose to disclose just as one parent, but you have to think through that one. Both parents are clear on why this is important and of value to the child. They've agreed upon what it is and is not disclosed. And the parent with the addiction doesn't share specifics about behavior. So I want to emphasize this because, again, kids need to know some of what is going on, but specifics of behavior are neither helpful or necessary. And in fact, it can add to the trauma. And even 9+ years later, I'm grateful that I don't know all the history. So we don't need to burden kids with too much information. Next, parents display signs of recovery, honesty, accountability, a demonstration of real remorse. Now, if the bomb has gone off and there hasn't been any opportunity for some recovery to take place, at least some honesty and a demonstration of remorse is a good place to start as signs of recovery. Neither parent takes on a role of victim. Child is certainly not to be used as a confidant. And parents are clear that it's not the child's job to fix this. That can be very heavy for a child if they come away from conversation thinking, okay, now I need to take care of mom and dad so we can keep the marriage together. And finally, an ongoing openness for dialogue and discussion is demonstrated. I think we underestimate the value of communication and how healing that can be. One secret shouldn't be replaced by another secret. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Now, questions that need answers. You may not cover all of these in a disclosure, but this is a good idea of what you might choose to talk about. So what does it mean to be a sexual addict? Addiction or compulsivity doesn't make a lot of sense to a little kid. So finding an age-appropriate definition, like addiction is when someone continues to do something over and over, even though there are bad consequences, is an example of something they might understand. Or examples of actual behavior. I was unfaithful to your mom or dad and to our marriage vows. I was looking at inappropriate things on the computer. Or I've been involved in sexual behavior that's wrong. Those are things that kids can understand. And when a child asks for specific details, there's that question again. It's advisable to say that, again, we don't need to share specifics about behavior unless it has direct impact on the child. So, for instance, if the reason you're moving is because of the addict and their behavior, that might be something you can bring up. Or if you're not visiting a certain relative at Christmas because the behavior was with that relative, would be information that you might want to share. Is this why XYZ was happening? So tying the addictive behavior to the consequences to the child. For instance, you could say to little Johnny, I wasn't at home spending time with you. Or when I was home, I was busy with other things all the time. I spent family money on inappropriate things. Or there's been a lot of arguing because I've been dishonest with your mom or dad. So do you still love mom or dad? And this is a tough one because especially a betrayed spouse, they may not know where they're at with that, but it's important to give an honest answer. And you might just say, so-and-so doesn't know where they're at right now, but we promise we'll let you know when we do know where we're at in our relationship and if we're going to stay married, because that will be a primary concern for a lot of kids, even for married kids. That was a big concern for me. I was out of the house, had been for several years, but I was worried about the marriage. Frankly, I thought there's no way the marriage can survive this, and not that I was planning on separation, but I felt that there wasn't any way that they were going to survive it. For sake of time, we're not going to go through all of these. What are you doing so it won't happen again? It's important to give kids hope so that they come away feeling like, okay, you know, we can move forward together as a family. So as the couple talks about their individual recovery and their marriage recovery, that will help give children hope. And finally, if you have very young children, you might want to consider a softened disclosure, which Stephanie Carnes talks about in her book, Mending a Shattered Heart. And this is just the process of staggering the disclosure over time. So it's a little less traumatizing and maybe more age appropriate. So my dad already kind of talked about this. How will the kids react? Kids are different, but it can range from like the fury from my brothers that he got, the anger and the yelling, to the sobbing that my sisters and I did. There may even be praise for their parent in coming forward because they knew all along that there was a problem and they appreciated the honesty. But it's important that marriages and the individuals involved with this recognize that it's not just the marriage that's suffering, but there's real trauma and there's real pain that kids are experiencing. My parents received a letter from an adult daughter of a man who is currently in recovery, and she expressed over and over how this felt like a stab wound, and just talked about how incredibly painful the experience was for her to witness this challenge in her parents' marriage. So I can say for myself that on that day that my dad disclosed, I was able to put my arms around my dad and tell him I love him. And I gave him a level of forgiveness that day, and I really feel like that was a gift from God to me. But for other members of my family, they needed time to process that information, which is okay. And one of the great gifts that my dad gave all of us that day was just the space to feel whatever we needed to feel. He didn't play the victim card. He just allowed us to feel what we needed to feel. And so if you are in that position, let your kids be where they need to be emotionally. Getting out that emotion is a part of healing. All right. I think I'm almost out of time, but we're going to cover this quickly. So what else can I do for my child? I've talked a lot about disclosure. And again, I want to tell you that even though you may think, well, there's a lot more to this than just disclosing, but that opens so many doors. Again, remember Luke and Darth Vader. There's a lot of healing in talking. And so I can't emphasize enough the importance of that initial disclosure, and that will open up other opportunities for communication. But what else can I do for my child if there's addiction in the home? Be proactive about teaching them about the dangers of pornography and about healthy sexuality. Again, keeping that communication frequent and open and honest, that is so powerful. The shame and the secrecy it won't be there when there is open dialogue in the home. Encourage your child to find a support system. This is tricky because, again, we don't want this to become like the neighborhood gossip. We need to help our kids discriminate between the difference in just telling everyone and just finding a couple of close people, maybe a trusted adult, maybe one trusted friend that they can turn to for support. So on those dark days, and there are some dark days, my husband, bless his heart, when that came out, he was the guy that heard me rant, and you know, sometimes I was in that mode of men are dirt, and he listened to me rant, but I needed someone to listen to me. So encourage your child to find a support system. Find your own support system as a couple. So as an addict and as a betrayed spouse, your children cannot draw from an empty well. So you need to be filling your well so that they can come to you for support. And then finally, work your own recovery. I'm so grateful that I am fortunate to have the outcome of parents that have remained married through this. And that's not the case for a lot of people. Healing for the betrayed child, again, this is difficult because sometimes people confuse forgiveness with trust. But you can choose forgiveness, and this will be a part of your healing, and still not trust that individual if they're not demonstrating recovery. Suzanne Summers says that forgiveness is a gift that you give yourself. So trust is earned over time when the addict demonstrates honesty and accountability, but you can always forgive no matter what point they're at. Allow yourself time to heal. It's a process. It's not going to be a week. It's not going to be a month that you're going to feel better about this. Recognize that it will take time, and let go of the outcome. This is really hard. Again, we've had a different outcome in my family than a lot of other families do. I know a lot of people whose parents have split over this issue. I have a dear friend who is in that position, and I asked her once, how have you been able to find healing? And this is what she said. She said, I've had to decide to just let it go and let him make his choices. We can't save people. It's noble to want to save them, but we can't. He's the one who has to choose to change. I can't fix it, and my job is just to love him and support any effort he makes to change. That has been healing, to recognize that it's not my problem. So finally, while you may think, goodness gracious, what an ugly, yucky story this has been, and it was messy, but we've been given a beautiful gift in an ugly package as a family. It's really brought us closer together. And we have joined our parents' bandwagon. We are hoping as kids to be vocal voices of hope, that there is light, that there is hope for change. And I'm so grateful also for the empathy it's given me for others. I've seen the pain. I've felt the pain. And there is a lot of it out there. But as we are empathetic with one another, as we put our arms around each other, as we're less judgmental, and as we give hope for healing, because there is hope, we can help each other so much. And I just want to leave you with that this is a picture that was taken last summer. We are a happy family. And while we continue to work this process together, there is great joy, and I hope for you that same thing as you grab hold to that hope and you move forward in a positive way. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. We're going to go through some of the solving the puzzle of recovery now. We'll quickly do that. You have a copy of this, so we won't spend a lot of time, but it's the puzzle piece.
The first part of the puzzle is in the center, a willing heart. And nothing will happen in a positive way for anyone's recovery from either addiction or betrayal if the heart is not there. And sometimes we have to do some work before the heart will come into it. But the heart eventually has to be part of the process. And with that, we see that there is a degree of responsibility that I have to take. I'm the person responsible. I may not know all that I'm supposed to do, but I'm responsible. So I'm responsible to find by seeking help. And so gratefully, in our own efforts of recovery, I will attest that when my heart softened, God knew, and He helped me. And I knew that I had to have a qualified therapist. If we had more time, we'd talk about some miracles that happened. We were blessed to find a great therapist. Qualified therapy was essential in us, in my own recovery, in my wife's effort of healing, and in saving our marriage. Now, all therapists are not created equal. Qualified therapy is an art. And so with that said, sometimes we don't find the right one to begin with, but still I'm responsible for the therapy that I choose. Education. Dr. Victor Klein, years and years ago, identified all these things, and these have been known for a long time. This isn't brand new science. Education, education, education. A big part of what we do as a foundation right now is provide education. And there is some great information out there now. If we think we're just going to be able to magically understand sexual addiction and betrayal trauma and the pathway to recovery, it ain't going to happen. We must study to learn. Where is the source of the real information? I have to be humble enough to seek that and willing to receive it. Now, we happen to be serious about the value of 12-step. A lot of people don't believe that it's necessary. A lot of people don't believe it's the way it's too hard, it takes too much time. I don't want to show up to some place where they say, "Hi, I'm Stephen, I'm a sex addict." I'm Stephen, I'm a sex addict. Hi. The second time that I came forward, I went to 4 meetings. There were SA meetings. The first 2, my dear wife came with me. Of course. She was in charge of my...
Some of you don't know that's a no-no.
Don't do that. But this...
I got uninvited on the second one.
Okay, we're getting to the part of the program now where we can't decide who's in charge of this presentation. Anyway, 12-step. I had a guy come up to me 2 or 3 years ago, young guy. 12-step doesn't work. And I got defensive because I didn't know what to say. Because 12-step does work if I work it, when I work it. And so I didn't make the right statement to him. But if he came up to me again and said, "You know what, 12-step doesn't work," I'd say, "You're right. 12-step doesn't work. It works when I work it." Now, most people don't understand it. They don't understand the power of it because they haven't done it. Bill W., who was the founder of AA, said, "Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path." Now, I can assure you, because I've attended hundreds, even thousands of 12-step meetings, unfortunately, a lot of people come into the rooms of recovery and they don't stay, just like I did the second time. Okay, well, I guess I'm out of time with 12.
We graduate after 12 weeks, right?
Well,
It's a 12-week program. Wrong, wrong, wrong.
Do we have another microphone? Sorry, okay, no, you take it.
No, this one's yours.
Oh, this is mine. Okay, how do you get from that chaotic model to a model that obviously has some semblance of order? How do you get from chaos to humble, honest, and accountable? Now, I want to tell you, folks, we'd like to think that we graduate from one model to another and we never go back to the other model. Unfortunately, it is not true. And if we had more time that we could talk about it, we slip back. Doesn't mean that we go back to behavior of pornography and prostitutes. But we'll go back, we'll slip back because of shame or anger or whatever, and we'll then emotionally withdraw. We'll go back to drama. That is why recovery takes time and why it takes a continuing effort. And so that we learn how to deal with life's stressful challenges in healthy ways. Okay, there's the solution. I learn how to deal with life's challenges in healthy ways instead of looking to fill my life with some counterfeit behavior like porn. And so this little puzzle that we talked about, there aren't shortcuts. And there's some people who want to tell you that there are. And we are here to tell you that until we learn how to not start again, we will. And so recovery is not about stopping behavior. It's about learning how to not start again and live a healthy life.
Okay, we're just going through some of these recovery slides, and you can see them all.
Trauma.
Oh, I can go back to trauma.
Okay.
Take me back, please.
Yeah, okay.
I can move ahead, but I don't know how to go back. Okay. No, that one's not it. Oh, yes,
not
it is. Yes, it is. Sorry. Okay.
This is confusing you folks.
Sorry. Here's one of my soapboxes. Well, it's my major one. If we lose the women, we lose the next generation. And so the women who are the mothers, we can't afford to lose them. We can't afford to lose them because of the betrayal trauma. We can't afford to lose them because they are the mothers who are nurturing and teaching the next generation, and we don't want another generation of addicts. We want healthy children. And so how do I nurture as a mother and as a grandmother? I learn to work my recovery and be in a healthy place based on faith, yes, my own recovery. His recovery is not my recovery. And you see that in the models. There's his recovery, and then there's my recovery from the trauma and learning how to live in a healthy place. And then if we both choose the marriage, if we both choose recovery, we will generally choose the marriage, because that's how I'm true to myself. Not always, perhaps. But in this case, and I'm going to say, I will speak for the women who are single mothers because of this issue. A husband that did not choose recovery and chose his addiction. But it is so much of a blessing that a mother can choose recovery for herself. I received an email from a single mom of 4 little children, and in it she talked about the blessing of recovery in her own life. And this is what she's doing. She's doing all of these things. And so as she recovers and she comes closer to God, her children are also seeing that. I asked our therapist 9.5 years ago, because I'm a mom at heart, how am I going to teach my children not to be addicts and not to marry addicts? And he said, you won't teach them. What? They will watch you. Oh, that's hard work. I'm responsible to be an active, intentional mom. Whether or not he chooses recovery is not my business. That's what I would like, but I can't make it happen. But as a woman and as a mother who chooses recovery, and this woman said to me, just the other day, my 5-year-old said to me, I know Jesus takes away my sadness. How do you know that? She said. Because you've taught me. This is a 5-year-old who is being blessed by a mother who is living this kind of lifestyle. There's still hardship. There's still divorce issues. There's still visitation issues. There's still problems. But this mother, through surrender and through working the 12 steps and the education and all that she's doing, is blessing another generation. That is possible.
We're not here to sell books. And so we don't want to make this an advertisement. Rhyll's book is exactly what women who are experiencing betrayal trauma recognize as their challenge. So at some point, if there's someone that you know that's suffering betrayal trauma, invite them to her book. It will help. And it's true about what the experiences are of betrayal trauma. This is our understanding at this point. When we first started down this pathway 9.5 years ago, we didn't understand betrayal trauma. It was all about co-addictive behavior, co-addiction. And women, codependency. It was co-addiction, codependency, all these terms of co. Never betrayal trauma. And so the trauma, this is coming from a guy who's observed from not experiencing the trauma from a betrayal perspective, but it is as difficult to deal with and to heal from as addiction. And oftentimes the spouse is left out of the equation, not because people don't want to help, but because they don't understand the need. Okay. Some of you may have come with the idea that you would like to learn a little bit about what do we teach our children to keep them safe. And the first thing that we have to remember is this: how can we lift someone to safety if we are not on higher ground? The very first thing that I have to do as a father, in order to be available to my children, to teach them and protect them and provide for them correctly, is that I have to be willing to deal with my own demons, my own addiction. Sometimes that sacrifice seems too difficult. It isn't. It's a requirement for a father. So in recovery, a parent is much better in position to teach their children healthy sexuality. A lot of parents want to shy away from this because it seems like it's embarrassing, or I'm not prepared. I'll tell you what, if we don't teach our children healthy sexuality, they will learn sexuality from a friend on the bus or a friend in their garage. So would we rather have them learn it from a friend in a garage or on the bus, or from us? And I know that all of you that have small children are amazed when they pick up a device at age 3 and can manage that device. They go, wow. And look at that child maneuver that device. Age 6, almost all the guys, of hundreds that I know their story, between 6 and 9 years old, exposure. And that exposure many times is euphoric. Are parents prepared to teach their children healthy sexuality, marriage-centered chastity, and what that means when I see something that raises these magical, mystical feelings inside of me? Wow, how are we going to prepare for that? I believe that the most important thing that we can teach along with this is God's epic story and how I fit into that, how my son and daughter fit into that epic story. Who am I? What we're talking about today in relationship to pornography and sexual addiction and betrayal trauma strikes at the heart of God's epic story. And it's happening literally in every family. We are now beginning to understand our level of need to be prepared. And so it doesn't happen just by hoping. It happens by doing. That's it.
Oh, I guess we go back. We go back to
What do you
our
want to go back to?
the hope.
The hope.
There we go. Tara showed this picture, and I said, should we take it out? And we said, no, we need to end on the same thing. Miracles have not ceased. Does it take a lot of hard work? Yes, it does. And some days people will go, I don't want to do this. And then you go, and then I go, how can I be true to myself? In what way must I be true to myself and true to God? By doing what I can. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I have learned to know what that means for me. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all that you're doing. We are a team. We are a small army. But those that are with us are more than that are with them. Thank you.